You're listening to Art Affairs, episode number 12. Today I'll be talking to Alex Warnick. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes complete with show notes at artaffairs.podcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe. And you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is bird artist Alex Warnick. I've been following Alex's work for a few years now, and anybody that's listened to the show to this point probably has an idea that I'm a big fan of birds and bird-related art, so naturally Alex fit right into that. She follows in a fine tradition of natural history artists, people such as John Audubon, for instance. But as we talk about in the show, she also does quite a bit of fine art as well. In addition to that, we talk about her love of birdwatching, some of the book and field guide projects she's worked on, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Alex Warnick. Alex, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's jump into your background a little bit. From what I understand, you grew up in Indiana, where it's where you live now as well. What was the environment like where you grew up? I'm sort of expecting more of a rural atmosphere. Was that what it was like?
Yes, it was very rural, suburban. Indiana's just a lot of farmland. But it's a very kind of slow pace here. You know, Indiana's called the crossroads of America. We always make the joke because everybody's passing through. They never stop. Everybody thinks there's nothing to do in Indiana. And when I was growing up, when I tell people I'm from Indiana, sometimes they ask, well, what did you do? What did you do in Indiana? And I answer, well, it's the state where you sit on your porch at the end of the day and just sit and do nothing. And life is good and the pace is slow and we're easily pleased here. And that definitely had a big influence on me growing up, was just kind of that easily pleased, interested in the little things. The nature here is it's not quite like the nature in the West with the bears and mountain lions and mountains and kind of this really impressive big nature. It's kind of small nature that is just all around you and encroaching right at where you live. You know, there's hardly a crack in a sidewalk that the plants aren't coming up and growing through. So nature here was just really accessible. You just go 10 feet and you find some nature to kind of explore. And so that was a big part of my growing up too. And I obviously I loved it growing up. It's why I chose to come back here eventually. It's my favorite. I've lived all over the place. I've lived in Idaho for 8 years. I've lived in Arizona for a couple of years. I've lived in the Philippines for a little while. I've been just everywhere, but Indiana is my very favorite. So
I have to say there's something appealing about that slow pace. I mean, now, like with social media and just so much hecticness, is that a word? Where like just sitting on the porch and relaxing, like I wish I had time to do that, you know,
right.
like, and you have a pretty big family too, right? You have several siblings and your parents. How big is your family?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 7 kids.
Oh, wow.
So there's 9 of us total. And that was a pretty big family. And I have a twin sister. So we were both kind of the youngest. 4 brothers, 2 sisters. And yeah, Indiana, the slow pace, it's kind of just the last place to get anything, to hear anything, to get any of the fads or any of the news. We're kind of just like in our own little world. And that's definitely something that I love about it. So even though I grew up in such a big family, I think we're a really close family for that reason, that you are just kind of isolated, and it's just kind of you and your neighbors. And yeah, so for me, it was an ideal growing up.
And from what I've read, your family is also super into nature, like the whole family. Is their interest what it sort of cascaded down to you and forced you to become interested as well?
Yes, nature is in my blood. My parents actually, my mom grew up at a fishing lodge. Her parents owned a fishing lodge in the mountains in Idaho. So she grew up there, and her dad was a fishing guide. And my dad has always been nature has always been his thing. And they met at a wilderness survival program in the middle of the woods. And with the story, my dad, just one day they were in like a solo camp. They were all off on their own. And he just went and cut a piece of leather from his shoelace, tied it in a little loop, and went hiking around to find my mom, proposed to her in the middle of the wilderness.
Aw.
Yeah. So they kind of started that way. It's just been in our blood. Each of us eventually, a lot of us anyway, have worked at wilderness programs. And when we were growing up, my parents purchased a little piece of property in the middle of the woods that literally had nothing on it, but it was just woods. And we would just go there all the time to build fires and just be in the woods. And every single one of my siblings at one point had some nature obsession or another, whether it was birds or snakes or anything. And so I definitely grew up that way. Nature is just it's just in our genes, I guess.
And so at what point did you become interested in creating art? Obviously, nature's been a big part of your childhood, but what about art?
I feel like I almost have identified with art even longer than I've identified with nature. From the youngest age I can possibly remember, some of my earliest memories have to do with creating art. And it was always something I identified with, whether it was in preschool or kindergarten. I always felt like I was an artist, and that was something I excelled at. And my twin sister too. I think maybe that's also something that kind of increased that, was that we both loved it. So it was something we did together a lot, and she's an artist now also. So I feel like, yeah, from 2 years old on, definitely by 3 years old, I can identify with loving art. It was always what I was doing after school every day.
And with your sister also being an artist, clearly you guys have kind of grew up, or at least had an environment that was conducive to creativity and art making. Were your parents like really supportive of your guys' interest in art?
Yeah, they were. I was listening to the podcast you did with Christina recently, and she mentioned being a Midwesterner, and she said that her parents, kind of Midwestern attitude, that they were like, oh, if that's what you want to do,
yeah,
sure.
Cool.
I think it's just kind of a little more laid back here. And my parents were like that too. They were just like, sure, yeah, if you want to do art, that's great. If you feel like you're good at it. And maybe that does just kind of come from this Midwestern. There's no competition here. So whatever you want to do, people are just really easygoing. But I definitely my parents aren't artists, but they're both pretty creative. But art definitely runs in my blood and my extended family. I think in our house growing up, just on our walls, we had paintings and things from at least 8 different extended family members who were all into art. And that wasn't even all the ones who were into art, just the ones that did it like at a pretty high level to where they were creating a lot. So that was always surrounding me too. Nature and art are both kind of in my gene pool.
That's amazing. And your sister also is into bird-related art as well. So, it's interesting how you guys sort of followed a similar path in life, where you both became artists, both had really interested in bird-related art. Is it something you guys sort of discussed and worked towards together, or did it just happen that you arrived at similar places in life?
I like that question because it was kind of random. It wasn't something we discussed, but our middle names are Lewis and Clark.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And we got those names when we got that because when we were little and we were crawling, we used to, my parents had like a little wagon train, one in front of the other. We used to crawl everywhere around the house, explore everywhere. And so they made our middle names Lewis and Clark because we just kind of had that explorer's nature. And you might be thinking, wait, crawling and you just got your middle name. We actually got our middle names before we got our first names. I didn't get my name until I was like 1.5 years old. And my sister didn't get hers until she was a year old. So
Oh, wow.
they just called us A and B. But that's what my first birth certificate just says B in quotes because I was born second. So I'm B and she's A.
Wow.
But so yeah, so we've always kind of been buddies in like this exploring mindset. And so growing up, we were always in nature together. But I was the first one to really start loving birds. It was an obsession that hit me first. And she didn't really jump on the bandwagon for a few years. It probably wasn't even until towards the end of high school. I would drag her along birding with me, but it wasn't until like the end of high school that she really started to catch that birding bug herself. And then in college, she really caught it. And then she just became as obsessed as I was and caught up with me really quick. And now we're both equally obsessed. And yeah, it pretty much defines our whole lives and our art careers too. So it just kind of happened naturally.
That's amazing. What are some of your major artistic influences in addition to nature? And were you exposed much to like fine art, or was it purely more of scientific art that you were interested in?
I was actually exposed a lot more to fine art growing up. All my extended family are all fine artists in different ways, whether it's carving or watercolor painting or printmaking, things like that. And one of the big influences on me growing up was my parents used to buy old used art catalogs, like at used bookstores, from wildlife art shows. And so I used to see that growing up and try to copy the little master copies, copy the little paintings and stuff out of there. So that was a big influence. But then as I started to get older, and really when I discovered birds, more of the scientific art started to have a big influence. With field guides, I've always loved field guides as an art form. There's something about just that simple, bold composition on the page that, all these birds, similar but slightly varied, repeated over and over. Just there was something about that aesthetically that I loved. I also, then as I got even older and really started to become a bird artist myself, I really became interested in studying the artists before me, who I'm following in the tradition of the old natural history artists, especially 18th century, 19th century natural history artists, people like Jacques Baraband, John Gould and his wife, and people like Maria Sibylla Merian and John James Audubon, the classics. One of my favorite things to do is just read their writings and their travel journals and see their art. And so that has a huge influence on me now. But another thing that has also had a huge influence on me recently is Asian prints and paintings, kind of that, because they also use that very flat, decorative composition, which is something I try to achieve in my own work. All of my work is very flat and decorative. And so all the art kind of has a similar quality to it with the natural history artists and these Asian artists. They all are very flat and simple, bold compositions. Is
that a new interest that you've only recently sort of explored?
Probably in the last 2 or 3 years or so. That the natural history artists came first, and now these Asian artists kind of came second. And my work has kind of changed a little bit in recent years too, and you can almost see where I started, kind of picking up that influence. Yeah, that's more of a recent thing.
Very cool. When it came time to go to school, you went to Idaho, actually, Brigham Young University. You said your mother was there for a while. Is that the reason why you went to Idaho for school, or was it something else?
Yeah, my mom grew up just about an hour north of where that university is. It's not too far outside of Yellowstone. And so I think that's why my older siblings went there first, actually.
Okay.
And every single one of us went there eventually. And at least 6 of us were there at the same time because we all took forever to finish our undergraduate degrees. So at one time, 6 of me and my siblings were all there together. And so I think that's really what influenced me to go was that my siblings went, they loved it. And also Idaho is really just the Western version of Indiana.
Okay.
You just switch the potatoes for corn and it's the same thing. And I think I just really like, once again, it's that kind of slow pace and very close to nature. You just go 10 minutes in any direction and you're in the middle of nature. And so that was a big part of it too. Yeah, the birding there was great. And so, yeah, that's really what influenced me to go.
And while you were there, your focus bounced around quite a bit. You started it, from what I understand, in landscape. You went to figurative painting, and then finally landed on scientific illustration. What caused you to change focus like that? Were you not finding like what you wanted in those other fields?
Yeah, I would like to hear from every artist and see how many have done the exact same thing, like ping pong back and forth to finally stumble on what it is that they want to do. But I really loved landscape painting and I really loved figurative painting. And even now I'm a huge fan of it. And one plan was, to make that my career. But then as time got closer, I stayed in kind of that focus. I was getting a BFA and I was getting ready for my last semester of school. But then, reality all of a sudden sinks in. And then all of a sudden you think, oh, being an art student is a lot of fun. But being an artist, a starving artist, maybe is not as fun as I've been thinking it would be. And also you just realize it's not necessarily an easy career. It's a very difficult career and it takes a long time sometimes to really get your feet on the ground. And I was wondering if I really had what it took to be successful. Not as much if I had what it took, but if I was really passionate enough about what I was doing, that I would actually do what it took rather than just giving up, and it was right before my last semester, I was sitting in a class and a professor told us, if you can take what you know and combine it with what you love, then you can be a success. And it was really, that was my turning point when I heard that, because then I thought to myself, well, what do I know? And I realized, okay, art, I guess that's what I've been trained to do. And I thought, well, what do I love? And then, of course, the answer, birds. I mean, it's what I've always loved. So I decided, maybe I'm just going to give it a go. And so my last semester, I dropped everything, actually quit my BFA and decided I'm just going to get a regular integrated studio art degree and instead just take an independent study and just paint birds. And I've literally painted nothing but birds since that day, except for a few insects in my bird paintings and a lizard or two. But it's been birds since that day. And it just my career kind of rocketed from that point. So that's how I stumbled on it.
And it makes me curious why you didn't start there. Like, why you didn't just start with what you loved in the beginning?
I sometimes I wonder that too. And I think it is, you just kind of get lost in the program and you kind of just follow what your professors do. And also I had no idea that it was an option. I didn't even know that it was a real career anymore, that you could make a living being a bird artist. So when I did decide to make that switch, it really was just like this leap into the darkness where I was kind of like, this is probably a disaster and going to be a huge mistake, but I'm going to do it anyway and just give it a try. And so I think that is why I didn't go that way in the beginning. I had no idea. And I didn't really have an idea until I graduated and saw, oh, this really is a real thing. And I'll probably do this for the rest of my life. And it's going to be great. And it's going to be an awesome life. So it's been a fun surprise.
Awesome. Do you feel that your time in school was valuable, sort of that exploration and self-discovery?
Yes, definitely. And actually, I'm also really glad that my background started as a fine art background instead of purely the scientific path. I think purely the scientific path is a wonderful way to go, but I think that my fine art background has kind of created a unique career that's kind of a mix of the two, since I kind of split my time between scientific freelance illustration and also kind of fine art pursuits for galleries and exhibits and things. And so I'm really happy that it went that way, because that suits me really well, because I'm very like this perfect even split between right brain, left brain, kind of scientifically minded, artistically minded. So I'm really happy that I was able to do both. And I think all that time spent, painting a figure and painting landscapes, those can only help you in any other area. I'm definitely glad that that's the path I took.
Great. And then after graduating, is that when you moved back to Indiana, or did you go somewhere else first?
Yes, I'm trying to think if I made a stop anywhere else first. No, I think I came right back to Indiana after that. And I think I was planning on heading back out west again to either Arizona or Idaho. But once I'm here, like I said, I just love Indiana so much. It just suits me and my personality, just kind of this simple life that I still may switch someday because I can really paint from anywhere, but I do love it here.
And did you immediately jump into sort of the work that you're doing now, or was there sort of a period of transition where you're trying to figure out? I mean, one of the things that I've found as a constant thread in a lot of the artists that I've interviewed so far is this period of confusion after you get out of school, where you're like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do now. You know, was that your experience as well, or did you sort of have a good idea of what you wanted right out of the gate?
That was my experience as well. The first year, like I said, I was just painting birds. And so the first year I told myself, okay, well, I'm not really going to go for anything. I'm not going to try to get any jobs or anything like that. I'm just going to learn as much as I can, give myself this first year to learn. I mean, I was selling my work at the same time to kind of create an income, but I wasn't really diving into this, full throttle career because I wanted to learn and get better because there's a lot to learn with birds. They're very technical. And so I spent the first year doing that, and all I had was my Instagram account, and that was it. And I wasn't trying for anything, but Instagram has been such a wonderful resource and inspiration, and it's given me so many opportunities that with that first year already, I was starting to get opportunities just through that. And by the end of my first year, then I started to hit the ground running with lots of jobs and freelance work and projects and things like that. But the first year really was just me. I didn't even have a studio table or anything. It was literally me sitting on the floor with like my travel paint box, because that's all I had, and just painting birds. And so it just kind of evolved naturally from there. But it was definitely a year of exploration in the beginning.
And you mentioned sort of balancing your time between scientific and fine art. What is your balance right now, and has that shifted over the years?
Yeah, in the very beginning, it was a little bit more of the fine art. I was painting more for galleries and shows and commissions and things like that. And then I started to get these freelance jobs. And now I would say, especially in the last year or so, I've probably been doing about 2/3 of scientific illustration work, maybe even 3/4, and another third or only a fourth now is fine art. And it'll probably go back and forth a lot. I can kind of cater my own career to what I want it to be, or kind of cater my schedule a little bit and say yes to certain projects and say I'll have to pass on other projects based on kind of what I want my career to be at the time. And right now I've kind of been just focusing on those scientific pursuits. I've been having a lot of fun and just get a lot of fulfillment of contributing to science in different ways. It's kind of my way to help birds in any way I can. So I've really been loving that lately. I've been doing a lot of that, but I'm sure in a year or two, I'll wish I could spend more time with just kind of the really creative pursuits of creating paintings just as I want them on my terms. So maybe I'll kind of shift that a little bit. But right now it's mostly scientific is what takes my schedule.
It's really cool that you have sort of that flexibility to where you can shift back and forth over the years. And if you're tired or you want to explore something more creative, go into more of the fine art. That's really awesome that you have that ability.
Yeah, it's lucky.
When did you start getting your work into galleries, and like what did that process involve?
Yeah, I was pretty lucky with that, only in that in the beginning I didn't have to approach any galleries. I was still just in my year of exploration thinking I wasn't going to be trying for anything. But like I said, Instagram has been really good to me over the years. And I think that it's just given people the opportunity who see that my work is a good fit for what they do or their galleries. So I've had people approach me. So after kind of towards the end of that first year, I had some galleries approaching me just asking if I would submit for a show or things like that. So I started to kind of create these relationships with galleries that way. And yeah, the same galleries have been good to me over the years, and I've done quite a few shows with them. Yeah, so that it just kind of was it just kind of happened naturally. I know it's not that way for a lot of people. And at some point, maybe when I do kind of focus more on that fine art part of my career, I might find some galleries that I would like to approach, ones that I think that my work would be a good fit for, that I would love to open my work to that new audience, and I will approach them. But so far, I haven't had to do much approaching. It's just I've kind of just found this natural fit and natural relationship with galleries, just kind of in a really easy way. But
that's great. Do you treat the two differently, like between fine art and scientific? Do you approach them in the same way, or is it just sort of the difference of where they end up?
I do approach them very differently. And like I said, I'm very grateful to have both because I kind of think of it in high school, there's English classes and there's math classes. And I really loved both classes. English was a place to be creative. And I kind of feel like it's what you create is more of your own and kind of has your own signature. And it's more original and kind of fulfilling in that way. But then math classes I always loved because I felt like, okay, this is a time. Math is almost meditative where there's just one right answer. You just do the formula and you get the answer. And I kind of feel like that's a little bit the difference between these fine art pursuits and the scientific illustration. I love being able to be creative and come up with something new, but it's a lot more effort, or at least it uses a different part of my brain, I guess, that's a lot more effort. And sometimes it's really nice to take that break and do scientific work because I don't have to be the creative one coming up with the answers. The answer is there. I just have to make the bird look what it's supposed to look like. And it is kind of a math problem. It's like a puzzle, which is kind of fun, that then uses the other side of my brain. But I really like it. For me, the scientific part is kind of more of a break, which you wouldn't think it would be, but it is. It's a little more relaxing, meditative. That's when I can put an audiobook in and just listen to an audiobook. Sometimes when I'm doing my creative work, I'm not able to, I can't, my brain has to focus a lot more because I'm making more of the decisions. So I really love having both, and I definitely approach them differently.
Well, and that sort of goes back to what you were saying earlier about having sort of equal strengths with both left and right brain, and being able to challenge those two in the same way. Mm-hmm. What about your mix of self-driven projects versus commission work? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that's also kind of split evenly, which is also how I like it, because commission work is fun because somebody else gives you something that they want you to do and they kind of outline the parameters. And in the beginning, I thought, well, I won't like that because I'm an artist and I just want to do whatever I want. But actually, it's almost like I kind of think of everything as like a puzzle or a fun challenge. And so when somebody gives you something with these parameters, it's fun to see what you can make of it and make it as great as you can within those parameters. And lots of times then you end up creating things you never would have because it almost becomes a collaboration with these people that you commission with, whether it's truly a private commission or even like some kind of scientific work where they just have something very specific that they want you to create. And then with my own self-directed projects, then I love that too. And because I am self-employed and I don't necessarily have a boss most of the time, unless it's a deadline from some kind of commissioned freelance work. But if it's just me trying to fill my own time, I'm always trying to find a project to create for myself. I really like collaborating with other people, kind of pulling in other disciplines into my work and creating deadlines and things for myself, making myself more accountable. I just find it makes it so my work becomes better and I'm forced to keep creating and meeting new people and kind of networking and creating new connections. So I call myself a project-based artist. I almost never just sit down and say, okay, I've got an exhibit coming up. What do I want to paint? It's pretty much never that. It's always, I have a project in mind, a purpose or a theme, and now I'm creating work for it, whether it's a collaboration with like a local refuge or a museum, or it's a trip I took to a place that then I'm creating this specific theme, series of work based on a specific theme. Whatever it is, there's always something behind my work that's not just pulling a bird's name out of a hat and deciding to paint it. So that's my favorite part, the creative part. I love creating these projects for myself. They're so much fun.
And what's the nature of your commissioned work? Is it mostly private commissions, or do you do a lot of like editorial type stuff or book stuff as well?
I do a lot of private commissions. In fact, recently I've kind of had to put a cap on the private commissions just because those could take all of my time if I gave them all my time. I wish I could do a private commission for everybody who wanted it, but they do take a lot of time. So I do quite a few of those every year. I usually have about at least one of those going every month. And then the rest of my work is pretty much always some kind of freelance commission from a corporation or an organization, whether that's for an article or a magazine cover or a book, or I'm working on a field guide right now. So those are really varied. Also, work for like educational signage in museums or parks, things like that. And then the other part of my work is sometimes like a deadline for an exhibit or something that I'm painting a series for, or a self-guided project that, say, I got a grant for, and I've created this project, and it also has a deadline. So that's kind of my work is very varied, and I usually have 5 or 6 things going at once. But that's kind of the split, how it's split up.
For the private commission work that you do your clients typically give you much in the way of like art direction, or do they just sort of want a certain species of bird and let you kind of figure out the rest?
Each client is kind of different. Some of them have a much more clearer vision of what they have in mind, and some, almost always, they at least have a specific species they want in mind, or an option of like a couple different species that they really like. So at least that, but every once in a while you get somebody that just says, well, what do you want to paint? And then it's just completely up to me to come up with something. But usually they have a species, and then maybe they have like a painting size, and then they're good with whatever I do. And I usually come up with a few different options of like little thumbnail sketches. I'll do some research and design a few different ideas and ask them what they like best. And then, working with private clients, I also thought was going to be, well, this is going to be really hard. They're going to hate what I do and want to micromanage all along the way. But actually, I've never found that to be the case. People have always been really wonderful to just kind of say, this is the bird I want, and I just like your art, so I think I'll be happy with whatever you do. And then I try hard to make them happy. But yeah, so that's always been a really fun process too. And so far, I've had no bad experiences with that. Everybody has been great.
That's wonderful. You mentioned birding and bird watching, and obviously that's been a big passion of your life. Is that something you're still able to do like regularly?
Yes, I am. In fact, that's the best part. The best part of my career is that now my birding is funded in a way. And so even if it's not for, clients will sometimes pay for me to go on location to see the birds I'm going to be illustrating, which is awesome because it brings me to new places and I get to see things my budget maybe wouldn't allow otherwise. So I literally sometimes am paid to go birding because that's a really important part of the process. But then if I'm not being specifically commissioned to go find a specific species, I am trying to travel all the time to see new birds, just because the more expertise and knowledge I can add to my bank of knowledge, the better scientific illustrator I'll be. So I'll often, if I ever have like a gap in my schedule, plan a trip, go somewhere in order to study the birds and get to know them better, someplace I haven't been yet. But then that always becomes, I'm able to take lots of notes, take lots of reference photos. It almost always comes back and becomes some project-driven series in the future. And then I'm able to sell all those paintings. And so the trip kind of gets paid for in that way. So my birding is funded now. So yeah, I still get to bird all the time. Yeah, so it's been wonderful. It's definitely this dual thing. Birding is half of my career and painting is the other half. So like I said, my career is always split in half, this perfect balance of two things I love, birding and art.
Does it feel any different for you now that it's sort of related to your work, or is it something you can still kind of do purely for fun?
It does feel different. Yes, it does. And actually, yeah, that's a good question, because every once in a while now I will tell myself, okay, this birding trip is not funded. This is perfectly for my own enjoyment. I'm going to leave my camera at home. I'm going to leave my sketchbook at home. I'm leaving everything at home except for my pair of binoculars. So that, because it is now that it is my career, if I'm out birding and I see like a great shot of a bird or an amazing bird, I get that feeling of like angst and regret, like, oh, I've got to grab my camera and I can't just enjoy it because, so I'll tell myself I have to like compartmentalize my birding experiences. And I will just sometimes say, this is purely for pleasure. I'm not even going to give myself the option of even having my camera within reach or things like that. So, because it can feel different. I still love it though. I know a lot of people say if you do what you love, you start to not love it anymore. But I love it. It hasn't, I don't think it'll ever lose its charm for me. I'll love it forever. but I do have to take kind of precautions sometimes to not get burned out.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about some of the artist residencies that you've done.
Okay.
In 2016, you did your first artist residency at, and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Muscatatuk National Wildlife Refuge. Is that even close?
Close. It is close. It's Muscatatuk.
Okay, yeah, I totally put the emphasis in the wrong place. And from what I understand, that's not actually terribly far from where you grew up. How did this opportunity sort of come about? Was it something that you reached out to them about doing, or did they approach you?
Yeah, that was a really fun one. You're right. It's not far from where I grew up. It's only like 30 minutes or so. And in fact, it was my like birding mecca as I was getting older. It went the place that when I first started to love birds, my dad would take me and I would see things like egrets and herons and things like that for the first time. And, I didn't even know there were birds like that in the United States at the time. And it was kind of this magical place. And so it's always where I would go growing up. And so it was right after that first year where I had been painting, like kind of just experimentally, that I decided I was ready to do something that stretched me a little more out of my comfort zone and also kind of connected birding with my painting practice a little more. Because at that point I was trying to figure that out. I was just kind of stuck in the studio looking at photos and I wasn't sure how to really make birding and painting meld. And so I really wanted to do a residency where I would spend a lot of time on location, kind of taking those notes and creating field sketches and planning paintings based on the experience in the field, like in the moment I'm there. So I decided to approach them. And I also decided to apply for a grant that would fund it. So I did approach them and they were great about it. They said, yeah, this is a neat idea. And it could be like over a period of 6 months, I would come once a week to sketch all day. And then at the very end, they were having a 50th anniversary of the refuge. It's the first wildlife refuge in Indiana. So they were having this celebration. And I would create like a little series of paintings that then would become part of that celebration to kind of make it a little more special and then kind of help out with the celebration and things like that. So yeah, and then I was able to get the grant, and actually the grant paid for not only my time, but a lot of my equipment, including extra camera equipment and things like that, which was really nice. And so I was able to go, one day a week for 6 months. And that's when things really started to click, that my art started to become a lot more, I think, authentic at that time, because I was starting to make that connection now between birding and my painting. And it was all just coming from me and my experience and from my own head. So that was a really kind of pivotal experience in my career, and one that was a lot of fun. And that, I tell people that a lot, make your own residency, make your own opportunity. So that's the kind of like project base that I say when I have time. I like creating my own projects like that give me kind of these neat experiences that pull in other people. And yeah, so that was a lot of fun.
And going there like one day a week, what was your process like? Were you mostly, as you were on location, doing a lot of sketching and taking notes, and then going back to the studio within the other 6 days of the week and actually working on the pieces? Or how did you approach the process?
Yeah, that is, pretty close to how it was. On location, I would take a lot of field sketches. I would take some photos too. I would take a lot of notes. None of my work was done like on location. The paintings weren't created on location. I don't have a knack for that. It's something I hope to continue to develop in my career. In fact, I've just applied for another grant that's hopefully going to let me do that specific thing, try to create more work kind of on the spot. But that one, it was more just a note-taking process, gathering inspiration and information, and sometimes designing, creating little thumbnails in my sketchbook, taking a lot of notes of the flora that was kind of in the area at the time too, that then would influence paintings. And then I would go back to the studio and start kind of piecing together all that information into a painting. And and then in the end, I think I had like a series of, I can't remember if it was 8 or 10 paintings that then came from that. So that's kind of how I melded the field experience plus the studio experience. Someday it'll be true, straight plein air painting, maybe. But right now it's like gathering the research that is what I do in the field.
Very cool. And you mentioned grants and sort of funding. In 2017, you were awarded the Dawn and Virginia Eccleberry Endowment from the Academy of Natural Sciences of Drexel University. What did that involve? Was that something you applied for, or did they kind of reach out to you with interest?
That was something I applied for. A really good friend had told me about it, and she mentioned that I had never heard of it before, but I think her dad was on the board. And so she mentioned that this was a really neat opportunity. And when I looked it up, I saw that it just seemed perfect for me. So Donald Eccleberry was an artist who focused on birds, who worked mostly in the early to mid 20th century. So, and he was really influential on a lot of bird artists. And even when he was alive, he kind of took a lot of artists under his wing and was kind of focused on helping people's career progress even at that time. And so in the end, they created this endowment kind of in his honor to continue helping future artists. And now it's not just focused on birds. It's really just any artist who is focused on nature in some way. But they give them the funding to then be able to go, and kind of the purpose of it is to go have experiences on site, to go find the birds in their location or whatever it is that you're studying, rather than just being stuck in the studio looking up on your computer, And so, so that was wonderful, getting to receive that endowment. That had a huge effect on my career. It made it pretty much, I was able to purchase all the equipment I'll need for the rest of my career to actually be an artist who travels on location. It takes a lot of equipment, whether it's spotting scopes, cameras, extra batteries, extra lenses, tripods, bags, gear, plein air painting material. It's just, it takes a lot. And I was able to get everything I needed, plus fun travel to where I was doing my project. But yeah, that's a really neat endowment that was a pretty exciting moment in my career.
Yeah, I imagine. And from what I understand, that also helped to fund the work that you did in the Dominican Republic, where you did research for a book on the endemic species in Hispaniola. And that was called Alas y Colores. My Spanish is not great, but from what I understand, that means wings and colors.
Uh-huh.
So tell me about that project. Was that something, again, that they reached out to you and said, hey, we want you to come depict these birds for a book?
Yeah. And the Eccleberry Endowment did help fund this project. And my Spanish is not great either. But I think, alas y colores, I'm not sure. But wings and colors in English, like you said. And that was such a neat project to work on. They did contact me through Instagram. Actually, like I said, Instagram has always been good to me. But they contacted me and said that it was kind of a corporation, a group of corporations, kind of a conglomeration in the Dominican Republic, was wanting to create this book in order to increase awareness kind of in pride in their country's endemic species, because a lot of them are really highly endangered. And so they asked me if I wanted to do it. At first, they were going to have a few different illustrators do it because they had a really tight deadline. But then in the end, it ended up that just I was going to do it. So I traveled to the Dominican Republic and most of my time was spent right on the border of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And I had to hire a guide, and sometimes my guide had to hire a guide to try to find these birds because a lot of them were tricky and pretty rare. And so I was in the cloud forests and in the jungles, and the Hispaniola is a really neat island because it's the habitat that's crowded into just a small island, which I think is about, if I'm remembering correctly, is about the size of Arizona. But they have deserts, they have jungles, they have cloud forests, they have lagoons, coast, they have plains, they have it all. So I was able to just kind of hop around all these different habitats trying to find these birds. And I spent some time there. And then after gathering, all the information and really getting to know these birds and absorbing it all, then I went back to the United States to work in my studio. That's when I became a hermit for the next a couple of months, and just worked on these paintings just all day, every day. And that one was really fulfilling because it was really neat to create something like that for a country that now they do kind of have a series, this kind of unified series of paintings depicting, what's special about their country. And it was also fulfilling in a lot of ways because a few of the species there's hardly ever, or there's hardly even many photographs of that species. And a lot of the photographs are kind of, the bird is half behind leaves and half, so in other words, there isn't an image in the world that just depicts this bird for people to see. So I was able to piece together all this info based on seeing the bird and seeing these images and create an image for the world to be able to see this bird in its full form. And that was neat because that really felt like I was kind of that my career felt very similar to what artists were doing 200 years ago, bird artists 200 years ago who were depicting birds for the first time to bring to the masses so the world could see them too. So that was just a really fun project. And I had 6 months to paint all the paintings for it. And then they put it together in a book, and they also made a website and an app. And they released it kind of at this big event that a lot of government officials and things like that came to, got a lot of publicity. And then in the end, they even blew up a lot of the paintings like really big and hung them around the park in the city and in Santo Domingo. So all the public and stuff got to see them too. And then a traveling show went to Madrid and London and things like that. So yeah, that was a dream.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Did they kind of come to you with a list of specific birds that they wanted to be featured, or did they sort of give you options, or how was that as far as art direction?
They had a lot of scientists working on the book too. And I even had some scientists that would communicate with me a lot to help to give me information and things like that if I had questions. And they had a very specific list, that were considered endemic, like that you could only find there and nowhere else. And so, I had a very specific list. I think 30. At first there was 31. It might have gone down to 30 by the end because one they decided maybe wasn't completely endemic. But so I had my list to just check off.
So in that 6 months, how many paintings did you end up creating for it in all?
They did 2 paintings per species. So it was 62 paintings plus like a cover painting, maybe 63 paintings. And the 6 months included the travel and the research and the planning, which that took every single one, because these were new birds. It took a lot of research, and every single bird had to be placed on some kind of perch that also made sense for its environment and things like that. And that took a lot of research. And so it was a lot of research, a lot of drawing, and half the paintings were 16 inches by 20 inches. And it averaged about having to do a new painting every 2 days in the end. So,
oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. What did you do with all the original work? Was there some kind of an exhibition at the end, or what happened with it?
There was. I flew back to Santo Domingo for an exhibition, and they hung a lot of the work kind of in this big finale celebration. And I thought it was just going to be a little thing, kind of a casual thing. But then when I got there, they're like, here, Alex, come meet the minister of da-da-da-da, and the minister of this, the minister of that, and the UN ambassador from this and that. And so, in the end, they said it was kind of the equivalent of what a White House event would be here in the United States. And I just had no idea. I had no idea it was going to be like that. But it was really neat. And really what was neat about it was it meant that they gave a book away then to every person who came. And that just meant all those people who have the power to wield some kind of influence all went home with the book and kind of this greater awareness, which was neat. So, so that was a big exhibit. And then in the end, the corporation who had commissioned it all also purchased all the final paintings, and they have them hanging in certain areas and things like that. But so, all the original work is out of my hands.
Is that book something that people in the U.S. would be able to buy?
It actually was a limited printing, and the printing is already gone. So it was not made very universally available. It was a large book. It's a lovely book, kind of this big coffee table style book. At first they wanted it to be 3 feet tall. They wanted it to be like Audubon's elephant folio originally, but their plans changed. But they said it was neat because Audubon was originally from Haiti, and he came to the United States to illustrate all of our birds. So I thought, this is kind of fun. Now we're getting somebody from the United States to come to our island to illustrate our birds. So I wanted to be kind of this Audubon parallel, but it didn't work out to make it an elephant-sized folio. But it is a big book, and it's not available anymore. But the site and the app, that's just if you Google Alice Coloris, all the images and stuff are on that site and app for for everybody to see. So
awesome. Obviously, field guides are an important resource to you, rather. I read that you're actually working on your own right now for the birds of Costa Rica. Is that? Tell me more about that. When did you get that project, and how did that come about?
yeah, this was actually the Birds of Costa Rica. It's actually a field guide that already exists, but they're working on their third edition, and they had me come on board to help with some of the revisions. And just over the years, we'll probably continue to work on revisions for the third edition, the fourth edition, things like that. But yeah, they contacted me soon after this Dominican Republic project. And that's also a dream come true because since I was a little kid, I wanted to work on field guides. And they've been wonderful to work with. And it's been a really fun process. One that also I was wondering, is this something I'm going to like? Just kind of painting the same family of birds over and over. And, you have to paint the slight variations between male, female, juvenile. But I love it. It's I don't get bored with it. And like I said, it's just kind of this fun puzzle that I've really enjoyed. Right now I'm working on the warblers. So I'm going through all the warbler species and pretty much almost all the warblers we have here, they have in Costa Rica. Plus they have a few additional ones, so that's what I'm working on right now. Probably the only family I'll get through before they publish the third edition. And then I'll work on others after that. But yeah, that's been fun.
Is that what you posted on your Instagram the other day, the Cape May warblers? Was that from that project? Okay.
Yes, it is. Uh-huh.
Nice. Did you have to do any traveling for that?
I haven't traveled there yet, but because since I'm working on the warblers, which most of them I can, go in my backyard here in order to see and do the research for, but I will be traveling there in kind of the near future.
Awesome. How many pieces do you think will end up coming out of this?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'm having to paint for the warblers. There, I think, is going to be maybe like 30 new plates for that. But then for what I'll be doing in the future editions, I'm not exactly sure the number, but I know I'll be working on it for many, many years to come. Yeah, lots of it's probably something. And with this publisher too, who's just been really great. We've been talking about other projects as well. So I'll probably be working on this kind of scientific work for the next, 6 to 8 years, possibly. But we'll see. But it's great to have something so long-term.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of job security.
Well, and as a kind of a resource for yourself, I'm sure it's been kind of rewarding to contribute back to that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Very rewarding.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about some of the styles you work with. One thing that I read that absolutely fascinated me was that you said that your paintings will often start as sort of a combination of colors that you want to explore, that birds are sort of the vehicle that you use a lot of times to explore and express color relationships and like patterns, which I found fascinating, that it was more about the colors and sort of the relationship of colors. Could you like expand on that a little bit more? Because I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of my paintings, the inspiration kind of comes from lots of different directions. It's not always bird. Sometimes it is just these colors that I'm really loving at the time, or I see a color that just kind of really speaks to me. And I think, I really want to paint that. And so then I start thinking of a bird that will allow me to do that can kind of be a vehicle to explore these color combinations. So sometimes that inspires a painting. Like quite a few of my paintings actually have inspired that way, have been colors first, have been kind of the basis. And then I've seen what has flowed from that. Sometimes I'm also inspired by when I'm out birding, I'll see a plant that I really love that's really unique or has some kind of neat, like the berries on it are really a unique color or something like that. And it just fascinates me. And I decide, okay, I'm going to do a painting with that plant. So then I think, okay, what birds? So I start looking around. Okay, what birds are around? What birds, might have some kind of connection to this plant. But usually there's always some kind of color connection in what I'm doing. When I create like a bird perch combo, I almost always am thinking about how are these colors going to play together, because, birds are so colorful, and I'm trying to create a harmonious painting that just has kind of a simple aesthetic impact of some kind, and color is a big part of that. So sometimes it'll be a perch that has no color because the bird is so colorful that I want it to stand out. Or sometimes I'll come up with like a color that will kind of complement or be kind of a neat play in some way. So yeah, my paintings are, like I said, even when I'm doing my scientific work, I'm still kind of thinking artistically. And when I'm doing my artistic work, I'm still thinking scientifically. But the art is, I'm always trying to create it. Simplicity is something I love. Even when I paint a bird face, I'm always trying to simplify it into something specific, kind of more of a portrait than like a specific species in one, like a photo snapshot kind of. I always try to simplify and create something original, but it's always aesthetically based. My art always has a really strong aesthetic focus, and that's usually what's inspiring it and driving it to begin with, rather than just a scientific focus.
What about composition? How much like upfront work do you tend to do around composition and layout? Do you do a lot of sketching in advance just to sort of figure that out?
I always plan. I call them the little thumbnail sketches that artists always talk about, and mine are literally the size of a postage stamp. I'll create a bunch of those little drawings first to kind of come up with an idea and a composition, because composition is very important to me. Even if it's just like a vignette of a bird in the center of the page, I try to compose it. And these days, I don't do as many of those as I do what I say is my work that's influenced more by like the Asian prints and paintings that kind of it's a full scene with kind of layers in the background. It takes a lot to kind of plan that out. And after I'm done with little thumbnail sketches, I'll create sometimes little color thumbnail sketches where I play with the colors, because like I said, color is also really important to me. And then I'll go ahead. And then after that, I usually do. And then when I do those, I'm never looking at photos for that. That's always just out of my own head. So all my paintings are kind of just spring from my own experience and kind of my own artistic vision. And then after I have that little design and what I want to create, I'll start gathering the references and resources to try to recreate that. And sometimes that takes a lot, little pieces here, pieces there, because it takes a lot to just try to create what I have in mind. And then once I have that, I'll just start drawing right on the watercolor paper. I don't do any kind of like preliminary tracing paper or anything like that. I just then do the rest of my thinking on the watercolor paper, which is probably not a wise practice, but it's what I do. And then I just go for the painting process. So,
okay, very cool. And you worked in a few different mediums, but it seems like watercolors is probably your favorite. Was that safe to say?
Yes, I think it would be safe to say. Like I said, in college, I focused mostly on oil, and I do love oil painting. And someday maybe I will get back to oil painting, but I definitely don't want to get back to oil painting until I've really solidified my style and what I do, so that when I do oil painting, I can just translate that just into a new medium. But right now I'm still kind of in this experimental stage, learning stage. So I don't want to switch to a new medium yet. But after college, I kind of then went to acrylic. It was kind of the transition. And I did that for a while, for like the first year or two. And then eventually I think my influence with, like I said, again, the Asian paintings and the old natural history artists, that it's almost completely predominantly in watercolor. I switched to watercolor, and I do love it. I love just creating something on a piece of paper that it almost becomes part of the piece of paper. The paint even absorbs into the paper. There's something kind of magical about that for me that is hard for me to ever break away from. For
sure, yeah. I mean, you mentioned maybe going back to oil at some point. I guess what about oil attracts you to where you might want to try that out again?
I really love the variety that oil paint really, you can have a variety in opaque and transparent. That's something I really love. I really love how oil paint can have a really luminous quality in the transparent areas. And then you can contrast that with really kind of chalky, opaque areas. And I think that variation is something that's really fun. And like aesthetic beauty in a medium itself has always been something I've really loved, which illustration doesn't exactly let you explore as much, because it's something that's just kind of, flattened and digitalized and put on a computer, and you can no longer appreciate just kind of what the medium was itself. But I really love that. And in fact, with my watercolors, when I'm doing my own fine art work, I mix a lot of stuff like gum arabic and things like that with them to try to create effects that when you're seeing it in person, kind of has a sparkle or something about it that's more than just the composition itself. And so that's something I love about oil paint, that it does have so much room to play with the medium, and the medium is so obvious and apparent. And watercolor, sometimes you can't see that as much. So that's something that attracts me, that someday maybe I will go back to oil paint to keep playing with that. Right now, it's not super conducive to doing scientific illustration. Watercolor's so much easier,
Sure.
and watercolor's a lot of fun too. But yeah, so if I ever do make the switch, it will be for that reason.
Awesome. What about your studio space? Do you have a dedicated studio outside of your home, or do you work from a space in your home?
I work from a space in my home. I'm in it right now. And it is just kind of like a corner of a room that I've kind of just made special as a place that I want to go, drilled lights into the ceiling right above my table, that kind of thing, to make it just right. And that works great for me. The literally, walk 10 feet in your studio, and when it's time for lunch, you walk 10 feet to your kitchen, So that works great for me. Although someday I would kind of love to have a dedicated space separate from my home. I think it would make it, being able to focus and just really buckle down and work, would be that much easier. But this works great for me.
Having the studio like at your home, do you find it difficult to sort of separate, get a healthy work-life balance, or are you always working?
Yeah, it is hard to get a healthy work-life balance when I'm working. That I tend to get distracted easily, and the doorbell rings or something like that, and then all of a sudden you look at your watch and you're like, oh, I just went to answer the door, but it's 45 minutes later. What happened? The fridge was calling me or something like that. And then when I'm not working and I'm trying to just have separate work and just kind of time to relax, it's really hard to relax when you pass the door and you look in the door and you see your painting in your studio and you think to yourself, oh, I still, that looks terrible, or I still need to do this, I need to do that. And so you're just kind of always thinking about it. And sometimes it's hard to feel like you have time to just be renewed, because you're just kind of living in it all the time. So that's another reason I would love to have something that's completely separate from my house, so I can separate the two, be a healthier balance.
Awesome. One thing I didn't know about you until I started researching for this chat is that you've also had some experience teaching art. When did you get started doing that?
I taught when I was in high school. Actually, I used to tutor art, teach art to like school age children a lot. And I did that in the summers, especially. And so that was something I really loved to do. And then in college, I was able to teach. I was a TA for a class where they just had us teach the whole class. It was like art to non-art majors. So I was able to do that, and I really loved that. And then I also worked for a wilderness program where at one point, my position there was focusing on art and education with the kids. And art there was something very different. It was things like making gourd canteens and moccasins, and teaching them how to make a bow and arrow, and, carve soapstone. So it was a little different, but that was still a lot of fun. And just recently, actually, I taught my first extended art workshop that was over the course of a few days. And I had a feeling I would love that, and I did. I loved that, and I hope to be able to do a little bit more of that in the future. But yeah, teaching has always been something I've done, and something that if I could make that a big part of my career, I think my career would be that much happier, because I just really love the interaction with people and just helping other people find joy in creating art like I do. That's something that's really fulfilling.
And that one that you did most recently, was that the one at the Morton Arboretum outside of Chicago?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So that was just like last week. Yeah, I was able to give a presentation and then teach a 2-day workshop, and it was great.
Very cool. Do you feel that teaching is something that sort of comes naturally to you?
I think it might. At least what comes naturally is my love for it. Being good at it or not, I'm not sure how naturally that comes. But that also does run in my family. My mom taught at a community college. I have a brother who's a professor, and my sister is probably going to become a professor at some point, an art professor. And people in my family they've always just kind of loved to teach. It's been and my mom's dad was a high school teacher. A lot of teachers in the family, a lot of teachers, a lot of artists, lots of nature lovers. So it's just kind of, yeah, we have a very specific persona in this family, and I'm just kind of following in those footsteps.
Very cool. Well, it's worked out. What do you have coming up for the rest of the year? Anything that you can talk about?
Let's see. This year I've cleared most of my schedule to be able to work hard on this field guide because the deadline for finishing up these illustrations is the end of this year. So that's going to be taking up a lot of my time. But I also have a lot of private commissions coming up. And I mentioned earlier, I have a grant that I just applied for that I'm hoping will give me the chance to teach a few more workshops and also do some traveling to create some art on location and to continue to hone my field sketching skills. And I have a few shows and exhibits and things too that I'll be painting for in the next year. And those are kind of my, that's what's on my plate right now.
Very cool. Well, we're getting right to the end now. So tell people where they can find you online.
Okay. Yeah. The best place to find me online is my website, which is just my name, www.alexwarnick.com. And I kind of have a blog there that I consistently update once a year, maybe. And then I have my Instagram page, which is also my name, Alex Warnick. And that I update often. I'm usually posting what I'm actually working on right now. And so, those are the two best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, last question, and it's something that I ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Okay, I'm ready for that question. And actually, I think this name has been mentioned before, but I would love for you to have Jane Kim on the show.
Okay.
She has such a neat career with the big, large-scale murals and things she does. And she also has a really neat kind of scientific bent. And I would love to hear just what her career is like in the day-to-day.
Awesome. Great choice. Well, Alex, thanks a ton for coming on and chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. It was a lot of fun.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Alex. One of the things that really stood out to me while talking with her was just how balanced she seems to be between her right and left brain natured work. The way she described English versus mathematics and how she sort of enjoys both types, and sometimes she feels one is sort of a break from the other. That was really fascinating to me. It's sort of rare to be so strong in both. But at least for Alex, it seems to have provided her with an opportunity to move her career around a bit, weaving it in and out of both scientific and fine art, as her interests naturally ebb and flow. Another thing that I was impressed by was just how closely knit her family seemed to be, with so many of them having creative pursuits of their own, and also being interested in nature, and also having some experience teaching. Having come from a family that was much smaller and more disconnected, I just think it's pretty awesome how they all sort of huddled around these common interests and how these things sort of became a common thread throughout each of their lives. So thanks again to Alex for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any suggestions for the show, or if there's a guest you want me to try and have on. I'd love to hear any feedback you might have for me. You can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com. And like I said at the front of the show, you can go there to check out any previous episodes. You can also find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. And last but not least, I just want to thank everyone who's been sharing the show in your Instagram stories and just on social media in general. I didn't have like a built-in audience at all going into this thing. So that sort of sharing and organic growth is extremely vital for building an audience in a community. So I really appreciate it. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.